Thank you. Councilman Henry will lead us in the pledge. Please rise. We're going to change the order of events due to some other places that two presenters need to be. We'll skip to item 6, presentation and possible action on a resolution accepting the financial audit for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2020.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. I want to present Tommy Nelson, who is our Chief Auditor with Scott Singleton and Fincher and Company, and he will present our audit findings.
Thanks for letting me go first. I'm going to hit another council meeting here in a few minutes, so hoping no speeding tickets between here and there too.
Will not tell the chief.
Yeah, no, I won't speed. I won't do that. So I appreciate the opportunity to work for you. You have, I think you've had maybe a draft copy of the report already. This is not, there have been a few little minor corrections, but nothing significant that would change what you've looked at, just so you're aware of that. The report is a clean opinion. Our opinion on the financial statements is clean. We believe these financial statements and the notes are fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. That's the kind of opinion you want to receive. We also issue another report. It's in a separate bound. It's a lot smaller. You don't have that, but it's a report that we issue under government auditing standards, sometimes referred to as the Yellow Book. We didn't give you a copy because it's really a clean report, but we report on two things. If you had financial reporting controls, in other words, we had to come in and make a lot of adjusting entries to your books to get them to be in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles, I would have to tell you that, and that is not happening here. It has happened here before, but it has not happened here in the last few years, and that's because of Jamie primarily. She's the reason for that, and we appreciate the work she does in being ready for us and helping us get our work out. So I want to be sure I get that said to you. In addition, if there were issues we noted regarding compliance with laws or regulations that apply to the city, I would be required to report those to you in that report as well, and we have nothing to report. So those reports are all clean. You should be very happy with those reports. The financial statements, I'll take a few minutes and hit the highlights. If you've had questions as you looked at them, I'm happy to answer those. If not, if you don't slow me down, I get to going pretty fast. So it's probably, if you want to ask a question, just stop me. I'm used to that. We're going to start kind of in a part of the financials. It's actually considered management's discussion and analysis, and it's the place I want to start is on page 14. And this is the your governmental funds, which is primarily the general fund. You have some other funds, but most of the activity takes place there. There's some activity that takes place in the debt service fund where we collect the debt service tax levy and pay debt service. But the general fund is the left-hand column on this sheet. We show the other governmental funds in separate columns. But in the total far right two columns, you see some comparative information, and that's why I want to use these pages, is because you get to see 2 years side by side. It's the only place you get to do that in the report. So you can see the very first line item, your ad valorem taxes, both combined general M&O rate and the debt service rate collected $2,951,000 in 2020. That's up from $2,663,000 last year, primarily because you've had a continued increase in your property tax base, and that's always a good thing. You didn't change your tax rate. Your tax base went up about 9%, and so your property taxes went up about 9%. The next thing I'd call your attention to is sales tax. You'll see sales tax in 20, $1,141,000 versus $1,079,000 last year. That's almost a 6% increase. Considering the conditions we've had for the last year, I would think that's excellent. I mean, I don't have to explain to you what kind of a strange year we've had over the course of the last 14 or 15 months. It's been been pretty strange, but surprisingly enough, that's kind of what we're seeing around our area. Is the sales tax is kind of holding up in most cases, so that's good. That's been a pleasant surprise. Your total revenues, if you look at the total revenue line, they are down a little bit, but you sort of have to look at the detail to realize why. Total revenue $6,800,000 compared to a little over $7 million last year, but you received almost $500,000 in grants last year that didn't repeat. I mean, those kind of happen when you can get them, and because of that, the revenues were a little higher last year. But if you took the grants out, your overall revenues would be up about $280,000. So they are up if you take the grants out. On the expenditure side, you can see total expenditures are down $6,300,000 compared to $6,900,000 last year. That's primarily because you spent the grant money on capital outlay. So the capital outlay is a lot less in 2020. And that left us with an excess of revenues over expenditures for all governmental funds of $512,000. If you look over at just the general fund, which is, again, the most important fund for you, that's where most of the action takes place there in the far left-hand corner, left-hand column, you'll see you had an excess of revenues over expenditures there of $416,000. We had some transfers out and some sale of some capital assets. So following those, you had an increase in fund balance in the general fund, $348,493. That left you with fund balance in the general fund of $2,061,907. Now, one of the ways we look at cities' financial health is we take fund balance as a numerator, take total expenditures in general fund as the denominator, get a percentage, multiply it times 365, and it tells us how many what we call days of operation you're starting the next year with. In your case, it's about 150 days, so that's a good ratio. Anything we consider 90 to be kind of the minimum, so you're well over what we consider to be the minimum that you'd want at 150. Depending on what you may have going on a capital basis, depending on whether you plan to spend debt or not, that sometimes you may want to beef it up a little bit, but 150 is certainly a good percentage, and you should be happy with the condition your general fund is in. If you look over, just to give you an idea of what the water and sewer fund is doing, if you look 2 pages over to page 16, you see some comparative data for the water and sewer fund. Again, this is part of management's discussion analysis, but it does give us a good place to see some comparative data. You see total operating revenues in the water and sewer fund in 20 were $5,051,000. That is down from $5,761,000 last year. However, you may remember, I'm sure you do remember, we received a one-time payment from the Upper Trinity Regional Water District in 2019 of about $523,000. That's really what made up the difference. Expense-wise, your expenses were actually down $5,493,000 compared to $5,684 last year. And those expenses, water and sewer fund, we do record a depreciation, which is obviously not a cash flow item. So there is $976,000 of depreciation included in those expenses. That left us, after those expenses, with operating income, a deficit of $441,580. We had some interest income and some interest on debt that made the loss before any transfers, $493,640. And then we took you took the Upper Trinity Water money that you got in 19 and you transferred it to some capital projects funds, $523,000. So after that transfer, you had a decrease in net position in the water and sewer fund of $1,016,882, and leaving you with net position at the end of the year $10,351,931. I know you've had a water rate increase since the first of the year. That was probably a good thing to do. You looked like you were ready for an increase to us, and maybe generally we like to see, if you're going to increase, rather than do it all at one time, maybe increase it a little bit along. It seems to work a little better sometimes, and the way it looks to us at least. As far as the water and sewer fund is concerned, if you look, just to show you how its balance sheet looks, If you look on page 23, the way Water and Sewer Fund operates more like a for-profit business. So when you look at its financial statements, that's what they look like. And in the Water and Sewer Fund is in the far left-hand column. Again, we have a water district fund, but it's pretty much an in and an out thing. Water district balance sheet, you see what we look at here is your total current assets. In your case, that's $1,641,743. That first column, the first section there, total current assets. We compare that to the first section in the liability section. Your total current liabilities, that's about 2/3 of the way down the page. That's $1,240,000. So that's everything that you'll convert to cash within the next year compared to everything you'll have to pay in cash in the next year. That's what current liabilities and assets mean. And we look at that in the form of ratio. We would like to see at least 1-to-1. You can see you're a little above that. It's about 1.3-to-1. That means you have $1.30 in current assets for every $1 of current liabilities. So but that balance sheet, even though the results might not have been that great in the Water and Sewer Fund last year, your balance sheet's still in good shape. So you should be happy about your balance sheet there. I will point out one other thing. Now, I will point one other thing about the current ratio. If you look at the next section, we do have some cash and cash equivalents and some investments that we are not including in that category because those are unspent bond proceeds that you expect to spend on capital outlays. So we don't include those in the calculation. It's separate. So just so you understand how that works and how our calculation works, you actually have more cash than that, or cash equivalents, but it's going to be used for something capital, so that we don't include it in the calculation. Okay. The other thing I'd like to just point out, because we've talked about it before, if you look back on page, go way to the back, 54. We are now in the 6th year for you of presenting the net pension liability. It started 6 years ago. Eventually we'll have 10 years on this schedule. We've been adding a year every year. It is a significant estimate. You have had some fairly big liabilities there over the course of the years, but I wanted to point this out to you this year because it's flipped around considerably. If you look at the first column, the important section is about the fourth line up, what we call the net pension liability. Now, what that is the present value of the plan assets. You have assets in TMRS versus the present value of the liabilities that will be required to fund pension payments in the future. There are a lot of estimates in this, so it's really just kind of an idea to tell you how you're doing. I mean, there are estimates about rate of return. There are estimates about when people will retire. There are estimates about how many people you'll have, what the inflation rates are. I mean, there are all kinds of estimates. So it is a significant estimate, but it does give you an idea of how you're doing. And you'll look, this information is, it's not completely current because the actuaries have to get the information to make their calculations and then put it in the TMRS report. So the information you're seeing here is as of December 31st, 2019. That's the most recent information that was available, that's available right now. But again, the fourth line up, you'll see your net pension liability. That means your liability, present value of your liability, is more than the present value of your assets by $235,000. If you look back 1 year, it was $1,293,000. The year before that, it was $381,000. I point those changes out to you just so you see how the estimates and the changes in it can affect it. But the big difference, if you look in those years, is the net investment income. In the third line down in that second section, you see net investment income. See, in 2019, the markets in general were very good. $1,624,000 of income. That helped reduce that liability down considerably. The year before, it was a net decrease, net loss in investment income, and the year before that was another big year of income. So it can fluctuate, but I point that out to you just because you did make some significant progress, and my guess would be if we had 2020 data, you might even be break even or better because markets continue to do very well over the course of the last years. Now, who knows what it'll be like, you know, in the future, but I think you probably are going to see some continued improvement in that once we get updated information. So I point that out to you just because it actually is a liability in your financial statements. We call the government-wide financial statement. So it actually does affect the financials, and it is recorded on a long-term basis. That's what I have to say about the financial statements. If you have questions about anything, or if I've brought something up that raises a question, or you saw something, I'm happy to try to answer those. Again, we appreciate your staff. You have come a long way in the course of the last few years as far as your internal accounting, and it's just excellent really now. So you should appreciate that. I've not always been able to stand up here and say all that. So I like to do. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot more fun this way. Okay, for me, probably for you too.
Any questions? Is there a motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Any opposed? That motion carries.
Very good.
Thank you, Tommy,
Thank you
very much.
Thanks for letting me go first.
You
I'm
bet.
gonna head out.
Drive,
on the road, Tommy.
drive safely. Yay. We have another presentation, which is item 8, so we're going to skip down to that at this moment. We have the Executive Director of the Texas Coalition for Affordable Power, Margaret Summereve, and we appreciate you being here.
Well, Mayor, Council, thank you for allowing me a few moments. I'm going to put this right here for right now and briefly read a statement, because if I try and remember all this, I'll forget something. 20 years ago, the City of Commerce passed a resolution to join with other cities working together for the benefit of all to form the city's aggregation power project called CAP, and it was to help cities save money on their electric bills. Fast forward, and the city's aggregation power project merged with a group called the South Texas Aggregation Project, and in 2011, TCAP was born with the same purpose: to find energy rates that save our members money and in turn save tax dollars. With 168 members, TCAP is the largest organization of its kind. As we begin our 20th year, we want to thank our founding members, those members that have been with us since the very beginning and have continued to be leaders in working together for savings. On behalf of the Board of Directors and myself, I want to present this to the City of Commerce as a thank you for your membership in the Texas Coalition for Affordable Power.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to ask that the council gather around Mr. Lockhart for a picture. And Margaret, if you will come up here and we'll figure out a way to get this in a picture. Taylor Phelps, can you help us with a picture? All right.
This way you don't have to get up, right? I'm not gonna turn my back on this group. You gotta be kidding. I know better than that. It's gonna take a while.
There you go. All right, he can stand without this here, so move the chair. Margaret, you want to come up here? I think there's room. Can you get? Oh, there you go. What a smart thing. We'll even make Lockhart walk without assistance.
Give it to that man right there.
All right.
We can put you in the middle of it right there.
Can you get us all? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Margaret, thank you so much. And drive safely.
I will.
Thank you.
Good looking group. And by the way, I want to make note that this is the last regular meeting for Mr. Lockhart, who got a brand new knee last Thursday, and I'm amazed that he's here, but we do appreciate it. Appreciate your years of service.
Been a pleasure.
Very much. Okay, we're ready to go back to item 4, which is the consent agenda. Is there any item on the consent agenda any council person would wish to remove at this time? If not, is there a motion?
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Item 5, presentation to City Council by members of the public according to the rules listed in the agenda. I have no cards. Is there anyone here to make a statement? If not, we'll move on to item 7, discussion and possible action regarding an ordinance to amend the fiscal year 21 general fund budget to authorize the creation of a building inspector position within the Community Development Department.
Mayor, Council, Howdy Lisenby, City Manager. This may be a little bit of a departure from y'all's normal kind of operating procedures, but as kind of a matter of my own personal philosophy, when it comes to the budget and the expenses within a local government, personnel costs, salaries, benefits, typically is one of the largest expense items of a local government because we are a service organization above and beyond all else, and it takes people to provide those services. And so as a measure of transparency, but also as a means of control, the fastest way to balloon and grow a budget is to add people. The fastest way to cut a budget is to remove people. And so I prefer that the total, I guess you could say head count, the total number of authorized positions within the organization, I think that needs to reside within the purview of the council during the budgeting process. And so in past budgets, I don't know if y'all have specifically indicated a total organizational head count or not, but moving forward, if we add or remove staff positions, I think it needs to be part of a transparent conversation with the council so the community knows what we're doing in terms of total staffing. So the item we have in front of us right now is a budget amendment because I want to add a position of head count. It is not a budget amendment from the standpoint of we're increasing the total dollar spend of the budget. We've had a significant amount of savings within the current year budget, and so we're looking to add the position, but we can fund it in this budget year through savings that we have in the current year budget. So the request is to create and add the building inspector position, but we're not asking to raise the total budget amount at this time. Now, backing up a little bit, what's the building inspector position for? We've had a conversation several times, and then a couple of weeks ago, we even had a workshop talking about our community development department and how we handle plan reviews, permitting for new construction, and then inspecting that construction. The city has been contracting with a third-party organization called Bureau Veritas, and so anytime a developer comes and wants to do a construction project, they have to submit a set of plans to us, and then we then turn around and send that to Bureau Veritas, and their team in the Metroplex does all of the plan review, and then they'll send us their list of comments of whether they approve the plans or deny the plans. If they deny, they give the reasons why they deny the plans. And that can turn into a pretty lengthy process because they're not here in Commerce. And so Bob the Builder submits his plans, we send it to Bureau Veritas, they review it. If they reject it, they send it to us. We then send it to Bob the Builder. Bob the Builder then's got to go figure out what he needs to change in his plans, and he gives them to us. We then send it to Bureau Veritas, they review it again, they send it back to us, then we send it to Bob the Builder, and that can become a lengthy process just to review and approve plans to get a permit to start building. Then once Bob the Builder starts actual construction, there are a number of phases in a construction project that we have to inspect it to make sure that it's being built to codes. Well, because we use Bureau Veritas And this isn't meant to be a knock against Bureau Veritas. It's just their business model and the fact that they're not located in Commerce. Bob the builder says, tomorrow I need a plumbing inspection. And he probably has his plumbing subcontractor on site, and he's probably paying that plumbing subcontractor to be on site. Well, the inspector that's coming doesn't say, I'll be there tomorrow at 2. They just say, I'll be there tomorrow. Or it's like the cable guy, I'll be there between noon and 5. And so Bob the builder has to pay his plumbing subcontractor to be on site for an unknown period of time waiting on the inspector to show up. And then at some point, the plumbing subcontractor has another job to go do, so they pack up and leave. And sometimes what happens is the inspector shows up after the plumbing subcontractor has left. He can't conduct the inspection, so he fails it and goes back home. And we have to start the whole process over again. And so that creates a great deal of frustration for the developer, Bob the builder. It creates a lot of frustration for the plumber, and it creates a lot of frustration for the inspector. And so we're looking to try to improve that whole process so that we're much more responsive in how we review plans, and we're responsive in how we actually perform the inspections. In one of my last communities that I worked in, when I got there, if Bob the builder submitted his plans, it would probably be 30 to 45 days before he got feedback on his plans. Shortly after I got there, we condensed that to, we told everybody 14 days. We did it in 7. Because if you're a builder and a developer, time is money, and we have to be responsive in turning these things around to encourage and promote investment in our community. So the purpose of creating this building inspector position is so that we have a staff member on our team, on our payroll, that we control their schedule. And so when plans are submitted, we review them quickly. We get the response back quickly. And then when it's time for the inspection, if Bob the builder needs it tomorrow at 2, we schedule it for tomorrow at 2 so that he's not paying his subcontractors to sit around waiting on us. And so we feel this will significantly improve our ability to be responsive because as Tommy with the auditing firm noted, our property tax revenue is growing, and it's not because we're raising tax rates. It's because we're seeing development, and the base is growing, and we want that to continue. And we feel it will be important that we improve our level of service for those developers and builders. You will see in the packet there is a discussion of the financial considerations. Miss Becky did an incredible job doing some research for me. And so we looked at the Northeast Texas region, basically from Greenville east. What's the average pay right now for building inspectors? And it was found to be between $42,000 and $48,000 a year is what qualified building inspectors are making right now. And so we're proposing to create this position at that salary range so that we can attract a qualified building official, building inspector. You'll see that 2 years ago for Bureau Veritas, we spent $32,968. In fiscal year 20, we spent $35,000 and change. And so far, just part of the way into fiscal year 21, we've spent $12,000. So creating this position will be more expensive than the services we're providing with Bureau Veritas. But we also feel it will be significantly more responsive to the needs of the developers and the builders as they come into our community. And finally, you've heard me say this before, in the first 3 months that I was here in this community, I had 3 different developers tell me that they would never do business in our community again. And that is not something that you want to hear from the development community. And developers know each other and they talk to each other. And we don't want that to be the reputation of our community. And so I think this investment in staff and in the dollars to support that staff will allow us to be much more responsive. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll take your questions. We were recently approached a couple of weeks ago There is a residential developer that has 51 acres under contract right now that they're looking to do a major residential subdivision within our community. At its most basic form, you're probably looking at 100 to 200 houses in a 51-acre subdivision. That's a lot of development. That's a lot of plans to review. That's a lot of inspections to have. And I think if we continue to rely on Bureau Veritas, that developer will also have the same frustration that a lot of others have. And I think it behooves us to improve our level of service, and that's the reason for this request. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
If there are no questions, is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 9, discussion and possible action on authorizing the city manager to execute a land lease agreement between the City of Commerce and Sand Knot Tree Farm near the Commerce wastewater treatment plant.
Mayor, Council, Howdy Lisenby, City Manager. As you know, our wastewater treatment plant is located, what do they call it, Bus Barn Road, down in the southeast corner of the community. And we share a property line with the Sand Knot Tree Farm. And we have approximately 10 acres on the eastern edge of our treatment plant that the city no longer uses actively. It's an old sludge lagoon that is in closure. The property is not actively being used by the city, and each year we have to pay someone to come in and mow or shred that area to maintain compliance with the state. Sand Knot Tree Farm is expanding their tree operation, and some of the areas where they used to park their equipment, they want to be able to use for farming, and so they need an additional place to park their equipment. And that's the request that they've made to us. They would like to lease this 10-acre lot so that they can park their equipment on it, and they've offered to pay $500 a year for that use, and then they've also offered to pay the full 10-year value up front, which would be a $5,000 revenue. And so what this has the potential to do is take an unused lot that we spend money to maintain, and someone's actually going to pay us, and they will mow it and shred it and park their equipment on there. Worked with our illustrious attorney, and we've worked up a draft lease agreement that we want to submit to Sand Knot that would allow them to use it to park their equipment, require them to mow and shred, and require them to make sure that they return it to us in the same condition they found it, so that there's no chemicals or fuel or anything on the site. And so we're requesting your authorization to negotiate and execute that lease with the Sand Knot Tree Farm. Happy to answer any questions.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Item 10, discussion and possible action on a resolution regarding the application of Atmos Energy Corporation Mid-Tex Division to increase rates under the Gas Reliability Infrastructure Program, GRIP, suspending the effective date of this rate application for 45 days and authorizing the city to continue to participate in a coalition of cities known as the Atmos Texas Municipalities. Beth?
Good evening, Mayor, council members, city manager. Thank you. I do have a couple handouts if it's okay to give those to you.
Please do.
Thank you. On the lease system.
Just give them to Molly, and she'll.
Thank you for letting me present tonight. The city, as you know, is a member of the ATM Coalition, and so the attorneys in that coalition this year have decided on the GRIP filing this year, which is the gas reliability infrastructure program. And under that filing, there is some information in this packet that you're receiving about our infrastructure program. I do want to note, I've gotten some questions just across our industry right now that the filing is from January 1st of 2020 through December of 2020. So there is no impact of the previous storm that we had from this February of 2021. Those rates are being held under the Railroad Commission and the state legislature separately. So this filing is based on all of the infrastructure and replacements that were handled in the year of 2020. So you'll see that in the filing packet that I provided. The second handout that I gave you is what went out in the March 4th customer billings. There's an English and a Spanish version. It was a two-sided customer billing. If they receive an e-billing, it also is just on the second page of their e-billing. So they would get it in their email, and if they scroll down, then it's on their e-billing. So there is an increase. There's both a residential and a commercial, excuse me. There's transportation and industrial as well. You guys only have one transport customer here. I'll note that you have 1,339 residential customers, 184 commercial and industrial. We kind of combine those together, so for a total of 1,524 customers currently in the city. So tonight what you're considering is just a suspension ordinance. The coalition has already agreed to the filing. They've already agreed to the increase on the ordinance as well. And so what the suspension would do is, if you did not choose to accept the resolution tonight, that is an option, then the rates would go into effect on April the 27th. If you do decide to pass the suspension ordinance tonight, it would allow you 45 days for the customers to see the increase. So June 11 would be the increase effective date on the bills. And I'll take any questions if you have any.
So if we approve the ordinance, it delays it until June. If we deny the ordinance, the rates are effective in April.
There's no denial. It would be no action.
Are there questions? Is there a motion?
A second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank
Any
you.
opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Item 11, discussion and possible action on a resolution denying the distribution cost recovery factor rate request of Encore Electric Delivery Company, LLC, and authorizing participation in a coalition of similarly situated cities and authorizing participation in future related rate proceedings. That is a mouthful, Jamie. Tell us what I just said.
Mayor, council, I'll tell you, the DCRF, it's a distribution cost recovery factor. What that allows us to do, it's an annual deal we can do to help recover costs for capital expenditures and earn a return on those. It's built into to our rate system. What we ask is that you deny it, because what will happen is, if you approved it as it is, and then the PUC changes it, then you would have a different rate. And we want universal rate for all of our customers. So we ask that you deny, or have a resolution to deny. And of course, y'all are represented by the AOC, Alliance of Encore Customers, and the steering committee. So we advise y'all to use their legal counsel for your document. But any questions?
So approval is denial.
Yes,
That's what we-
a resolution to deny.
Okay.
So,
Approve the resolution to deny.
yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. It would affect, the average residential customer that uses 1,300 kilowatt hours would be about $1.35 increase per month. So
It's pretty common to deny it anyway, isn't it?
Yes, we ask all, yeah, because we won't want it to go to the PUC for a single rate system-wide.
Okay. Questions? Is there a motion? Hold up a flag, we. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, sir. Item 12, first reading. Discussion and possible action on an ordinance adopting the 5th edition of the Texas State Records Retention Schedule.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The Local Records Government Act, adopted by the Texas Legislature in 1989 and has been codified in the Texas Local Government Code. You can see why I looked at my piece of paper to repeat that, but essentially what that means is everything you have on the dais tonight and everything that we do are records that belong to the citizens of Commerce. So, of course, there are some documents that there are exceptions. You don't have access to my bank account. You wouldn't want it anyways. But everything that we do, everything on the dais tonight, that's all the citizens' property. So, essentially, the city back in 2013, we adopted the Texas State Library Archives Commission 4th edition, which was, I believe, released in 2013. So this is just a simple housekeeping item where we're going to adopt the 5th edition. There's various retention schedules. Some are specific to public utility districts. Some are specific to school districts. We're asking you to adopt the one specific to local government code, and it's the 4th edition, and this will be the first reading. I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Item 13, first reading, discussion and possible action on the adoption of an ordinance regulating scooter and bicycle sharing services within the City of Commerce.
Mayor, Council, this is Howdy Lisenby, City Manager. I guess it was a month or two ago, I got a call from the mayor who had gotten a call from, I guess it was Bird Scooters. There's a number of different companies that you'll see around, and their business model it's like Uber without the driver. They'll bring in a supply of two-wheeled scooters or even bicycles, and then you can, using an app on your smartphone, rent that scooter or that bicycle and use it to move around wherever you need to. And when you finish, you log out through the app, pay whatever your rental fee is, and then leave that scooter and bicycle wherever you stopped. And that business model typically doesn't fall within most municipalities' regulations for taxi and those related ride-sharing services. So Mayor asked us to look into it and see what our options are. I've worked in a couple of different cities where this became a conversation. And so what you have tonight is based on some research I asked Ms. Becky to do regarding what our options are to regulate the use of these bicycle and scooter sharing services. Ultimately, what the challenge is that is presented to communities is if left unregulated, you start having scooters and bicycles randomly located on the sidewalks, which reduces people's ability to move around. They end up left out on the road, which impacts vehicle traffic. And so what this regulation would do would require them to get a permit from the city to recognize that they're going to operate. And then it requires them to maintain control of their scooters and bicycles so that they have kind of a home base, if you will, so that if the scooters and bicycles get scattered all over the community, they then have to collect those and bring them back to home base. They don't just leave them scattered all over the place. And so this particular ordinance has been successfully used, and so it's what we present for your consideration for first reading. Our attorney, Charles, did review it. There was a question about if we begin to initiate an offense that there's a scooter that's left where it shouldn't be, Do we go after the business that owns the scooter, or do we go after the customer that rented it and left it there? And I think that is a valid discussion point. From my experience, what I've seen is that by the time we find the scooter, the renter is long gone, and we have no knowledge of who the renter is unless we go to the company and we ask them for access to know who rented the scooter. Sometimes those companies are hesitant to release their customer information, or they're not timely in the release of that customer information, and it makes enforcement pretty difficult. So I believe we've currently got it written so that it would go after the owner of the scooter, not the renter of the scooter. And so that I thought was an excellent question and is part of the discussion. So we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Is there a motion?
In the downtown area and also at the university. And in order for them to, and so they would in theory have two home bases, one in the downtown area and then one at the university. But the way our regulations are written is they can't use the university unless they get permission from the university separate from the city. But their interest was primarily on and around the campus and then in the downtown area.
And how long did they have to pick it up? How often do they go around and round up things? I didn't see that in there, but I tell you, I didn't actually get into reading.
I think it's, as we find them, we notify them, and they've got a certain amount of time to move it before we would issue citations.
You know, I have, and I don't remember the city for some reason. I think it may have been California. I'm not sure. That became really an issue, you know, of a lot of these being, you know, left in places unattended. You know, if this company is in the Metroplex area, how long is it going to take them to get out here? I mean, I think there's personally some more digging or a little bit more information I would like to know. I don't know where we would get that information, but I can see being difficult if you're renting it to ride and then you've got to take it back where you got it. Well, did you get where you wanted? I mean, I just see some logistics in there that could wind up leaving.
And what we ran into in one of my previous communities is we did something similar to this, that the rentor can take it and wherever they stop, that's where they leave it. But then whoever's operating the business has to be able to make their route, collect them, and bring them back. They didn't want to deal with that headache, and so they just stopped operating. And so rather than go through the trouble of, it's like I've got friends who did vending businesses, and so they had a route where every day they went around to all their vending machines and restocked. These people don't want to drive a route and pick up all the bicycles and scooters, so they end up just not operating. Typically is what happens. I did visit San Diego for a conference, and they had a bicycle service, and some of the feedback I got was that most of the bicycles ended up stolen and across the border in Mexico, and so they were constantly calling law enforcement, trying to figure out why their bicycles were getting stolen, and I don't know that Chief wants that headache either. So our recommendation is to approve the ordinance so that we can get some kind of regulations on the book before they show up. Because if they show up prior to our regulations, we have very little to say in what they do.
So there's nothing on the books right now?
There's nothing on the books right now.
Okay.
They can show up tomorrow and sit out scooters.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the ordinance regulating scooter and bicycle sharing services within the City of Commerce.
A second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Item 14, discussion and possible action on an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Commerce, Texas, amending Chapter 2 Administration and adding Article 6 Ethics and adopting general standards of ethics, conflicts of interest and related disclosures, gifts and honorariums, adopting regulated definitions and associated interpretations of such terms, ethics training, and adoption of policy for elected and appointed officials for the City of Commerce.
Mayor and council, recently myself and the city manager hosted a new council member candidate orientation. Upon doing so, I really dug into our ethics policies, which what I found was we passed a resolution in July of 2015 with a ethics policy. When I started doing some research, most cities codify that in their code of ordinances. In an effort to kind of clean up our ordinances, which I believe was one of the intentions of the council this year, what you have before you is about a 10-page ethics policy, quite lengthy. Charles has some suggestions. There were some things in particular. One of the things that was addressed was something that would prohibit former city employees from utilizing information that was obtained in their position. Say, for instance, somebody was working for the city and knew of a project that was coming to town, and they were let go by the city or they quit, and they went to that company's competition and said, hey, you may want to get in there. And so stuff like that that prevents that kind of stuff from happening. One of the recommendations Charles made was perhaps you might want to consider, would that just apply to employees who are terminated? Would that apply to individuals who retire? So that was one thing that was addressed. One thing I would also note is that this policy is not only for city council, but it's an ethics policy for city employees, as well as all of our city boards and commissions. And I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
As you said, that it was 10 pages, it's a little hard to absorb all of it. And
Sure.
there's one thing, and
Mm-hmm.
this, is it in the charter? Was it the charter review that did this?
So,
And then so it was in the charter, but not ever adopted, is that correct?
correct. In 2015, I believe.
So changes can be made to this. Okay. One question I have, and it was under the general rule of an employee or official not gaining economic advantage. I think it's on page 211 on our iPad. And it was that an employee, a family of the employee, family member cannot have a financial gain. And starting to think back at this, I was thinking of two people in particular from years ago, and that was like Robert Smith that did garage door openers,
Mm-hmm.
but he was also a fireman of ours. A lot of our employees, or several of our employees, have additional jobs, especially firemen, that Robert Smith did fences and garage doors. Cato, he
Mhm.
also did some electronic work while he was here. I guess my question is, if would those employees still be able to do a minor job within the city? Let's just use Cato for example.
Mhm.
Would he be able to do something for the city or do something for the police department or any of the departments in here, because he is the expert and we could get him right then, or somebody like Robert Smith, or so that's
Let me take first stab, and I'm going to answer and pose a question, but I want to do it in two steps. The first thing I want to do is within this document, section 1.1, paragraph B, you don't have to go through there because I'm going to read it, because it's just one paragraph, and I think it's important for everybody to hear. Public service is a public trust. All city officials and employees are stewards of that public trust. They have a responsibility to the citizens of the city to administer and enforce the city charter and the city ordinances. To ensure and enhance public confidence in the city government, each city official and employee must strive not only to maintain technical compliance with the principles of ethical conduct set forth in this article and in state law, but also to avoid the appearance of impropriety at all times. And so part of the underlying goal of something like this is to preserve and protect the public trust in their local government. I've said to y'all and to my staff before, the most valuable thing we have to do our jobs is trust. It's the hardest to gain, it's the easiest to lose. And so whatever policies we adopt, we need to keep in mind the behaviors that we want to promote with that policy. And so we specifically wanted to raise the question that you raised. You just beat us to the punch. When it comes to how city employees interact outside of their employment. This can become somewhat of a gray area. First, because, and we'll use your firefighter example. There are others, but when Bob, a fictional firefighter, when he ends his shift and he clocks out and he goes home, if he turns around and just changes his clothes, puts on a different hat, and then comes back and immediately starts working on a project for the city, and he's getting paid under a contractual relationship, it at least begs the question, how was that contract obtained? How did he get access to do that? Did he have some kind of insider advantage where he got the job rather than a local citizen? It asks the question. And so this policy either needs to say, no, employees can't do that work, or it all needs to be open, transparent, and in the sunlight so that everybody can see that it was done fairly. And so the way it's written right now, that employee cannot do any work for the city. And so there are situations where that actually hurts the city. And I'll give you a very specific example. We recently had a new sign made for our animal control shelter. And we reached out to a number of groups that can make those signs, and custom metal work is not cheap. But we also have a firefighter who, when he clocks out and goes home, has a metal fabrication business. So he made the sign at cost for us and saved us quite a bit of money, and we got a nice custom sign at quite a bit lower than market prices because he did it for us at cost. We had prices from other vendors, but we got it at a considerable savings. So the policy as it's written, we could not have taken advantage of his offer to do it at cost, and we would have spent more money on the sign. And so this draft says no, employees can't do that. I think staff's recommendation is that you would consider a version of that so that it's all in the sunlight, it's all on top of the table, so that it's bid, that it's fair, that it's transparent, because there is opportunities for something like that in which it can save the city money. However, this is not always a simple question. You then have the issue of Fair Labor Standards Act. And is the employee still working for the city as an employee, in which those hours need to be logged and part of overtime calculation, or are they working not as an employee any longer, but rather there's a real and true contract? And spoke at length with Charles about this. You're going to have to take a look at that on a case-by-case basis, because if Bob the firefighter clocks out, goes home, changes his hat, and then he just starts working as a DBA, and he owns the company, and he's doing work that's beneficial to the city, there's a very real likelihood that Fair Labor Standards Act is going to say those hours, he's still an employee, and we need to track those hours, and it needs to be part of overtime calculation. But if Bob the fireman clocks out, leaves here, and he starts working as an employee of another company, and that company got the contract, and he's working as an employee of Company B rather than of the city, there's enough separation there that you no longer track the hours. So it's complex, but I think it's something that we need to give some serious consideration, because I go back to my first statement. The most valuable thing we have to do our jobs is trust, and we need to guard that trust jealously, and these are the kinds of policies that speak to that. Charles, I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that or not.
No, I appreciate the chance to weigh in. These things are always complicated. They're always very individual to the individual city. You all as a council have to make a decision what is going to be in the best interest of the city in terms of the perception that things are run well here, that it's above board, as the manager said. And some communities approach that as the original draft, that you have a bright line rule and cities don't get involved. But as the managers also pointed out, sometimes there's another duty here and to spend the citizens' money wisely, and is there a way to balance that? And you all are in the great position of telling us which way you want it to be. But that's really what it gets down to, and all the questions in the ordinance are that way. And I'm not taking anything away from Molly on this one, because these are very hard ordinances. This is a very good draft. We're kind of just picking around the edges right now, but it's an important point, and I think the manager is correct to come to you all for policy direction in this area.
I don't know if I answered your question, but
Well, thank you so much.
Posed back.
We appreciate the opportunity to be indecisive. Comments, questions?
Well, at the federal and the state level, whenever if you are working for the federal government or the state government, you've quote signed a contract and you have pledged your oath, and employees here do basically the same, right? But
I would caution that they don't sign a contract. They're still at-will employees.
They're at will. Well,
But
same thing with the state, but
No.
you still actually are signing one. But you cannot, if you're working for the state or the federal, you cannot have outside business unless it's a first approved. And so I think maybe we should be looking at that as well, so that way we know that different people are having other businesses, so that, to help with that transparency, and keeps it above board as much as possible, so that we don't have any idea of, all of a sudden someone's coming in and bidding on something, and we had no idea that they were doing outside business. Specifically because a lot of it has to do with you're supposed to be working for the city or the government, and if you're taking off your time, yes, you may have time to do it, but you're supposed to be doing work for the government as who you are contracted with. So that may be something we need to look at as well.
I mean, I think if it can be done and written in a way that is transparent, and then we could still, accommodate, and I don't know how often this may happen, but just using your same example with the sign, I think it is advantageous when we do have someone, whether when it's written that they have to have a DBA, or they have to be, what guidelines are we going to require there, that they actually have a true business, or is it just something they do on the side? I think that all looks like it's a Charles thing to me.
And I think some of the differentiation would be, are we buying a product or are we buying a service? Because if Bob is going to make something and we buy the something from him, then the time he spent making the thing's probably not going to be logged under Fair Labor Standards. But if he's providing a service, then the time he spends performing that service is probably going to be tracked under Fair Labor Standards for overtime calculation. And so I want to make sure that we don't expose ourselves to some liability from that point as well. In the spirit of being indecisive, I would recommend that we write it in a way that if we're buying a product from someone, it is allowed as long as it is an open and transparent bid process. Understanding that there's always the risk that the guy who didn't get the bid can complain that the employee had insider information that allowed him to be low bid. And we have to be able to defend against those claims. But if the employee is providing a service, I'm going to say no, we don't do that because of the risk of Fair Labor Standards.
When you say provide a bid, at what point do we have to? Is there a dollar value, a monetary value that we go out for a bid? Under 20, when it's under 25? Okay.
And so if it's under $2,500, we're gonna ask and expect the chief to get at least 3 quotes, but he doesn't have to submit it to us for approval first. And part of the underlying, call it assumption there, is that the chief is not gonna put his job on the line for a $500 something by cutting corners and helping one of his buddies, because his buddy could get a $500 something and he could lose his job. Chief's not gonna take that risk, assuming he's reasonable and rational.
And I think it's right to focus on the low end of these kind of things, but state law does come into play here, and $50,000, there's a very formal process of written bids and notices published, but.
Well, and I think, just kind of thinking through this, most of the things that I'm thinking would be, is like the sign. It's not going to be, something that's fairly routine and often, but something like a sign or some other thing. So that was just my question on that.
And I want to be very clear, this has not happened in Commerce, but in one of my previous communities, we actually terminated not a director, but a division manager, because he had a business that he ran on the side after hours. And we discovered that, as an example, there were many examples, that's why he got terminated, but the city would go buy a pallet of concrete from the local hardware store, and maybe there's 20 bags of concrete on that pallet. Only 18 bags would show up to the city yard, and it just so happened that this guy in his side business needed 2 bags of concrete for whatever job he was doing. And so he was using city funds to buy supplies for his project on the side. So this speaks to some of what Stephanie's talking about, is if employees are doing side businesses, we're not gonna stop them, but they do need to notify us so that we're aware of that, because we have to watch for those type of issues as well.
If I could ask as well, I mean, we're talking about if we go in a direction of more sunshine in order to get the city, what would that consist of from the council standpoint? And I'm assuming it's not just put it on the webpage somewhere, but potentially up to council approval or something at a public meeting at that level. It might be another way to get the sunshine, to get the exposure, to let people know that this is going on and we don't have anything to hide, but this is what could be done. So as we write that, as we're asked to write that, is that the level that you would want in terms of exposure and notice to the public that it would come back to this group?
I have a real hesitancy for us to manage that level of operation. We have a city manager, and that city manager is responsible for a group of directors. They're all responsible people, or we don't need them, and we should trust them. And if there is an exception and a question, it should come to us. But otherwise, good reason to run off a city manager. He's going to be watching for it.
Thanks, Mayor, I appreciate that.
Just wanted you to know.
Duly noted.
So should we table this until we get
What should we do?
Well, this is first reading.
Yeah.
And so if you can approve it and move it forward to second reading, and we can make whatever adjustments you want before it gets to second reading. If you know there's something that you would like to see in there, you can approve first reading with these edits, and we can have it prepared and ready for second reading. You could also table it, but just realize that it's ultimately going to require 2 readings.
All right.
And so I would either table it, or I would approve first reading with some direction that you all feel confident in. But I do want to say that it's not just focused on employees. I've worked in communities where council members either owned or managed businesses where purchases were made. All of that has to be in the sunlight as well.
Well, I really like the items related to non-employees. I think that's exceptionally important, and currently we don't state exactly what we expect, and I think it's necessary. So, what is your pleasure?
Well, I move that we accept the ordinance or the first reading with the possible changes, looking at the services versus the product.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And thank you, gentlemen, for bringing that to our attention
Thank
and
Molly.
helping us work through it. And Molly, appreciate it very much. Item 15, first reading. Consideration and possible action on an ordinance amending Chapter 90, Traffic and Vehicles, subsection 90-101A2 and A3 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Commerce to designate a no parking zone on a portion of the east and west side of Bodark Street between Stonewall and Culver Street, providing a penalty and providing for an effective date.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As the mayor said, this is an amendment to the no parking map, adding the section of Bodark Street south of the university from Stonewall to Culver as a no parking zone. It's part of our efforts to clean up city streets. We've got a number of city streets that are narrow. This particular one is not as narrow as some of them, but we're seeing an abundance of cars blocking driveways when they have special events on the university. Parking lot 19 is right there. You can kind of see it on your map where that, I believe it's where that P is. We was over there last week and it's completely vacant and those streets are completely full, blocking driveways. We're getting calls over there. So this is an ordinance that we're asking to help us clean up this area and force those cars out of those driveways, out of the lanes of travel and back into those lots. If you're familiar with it, if you look at that map, this is going to be south of the university from around the Alumni Center all the way down. There is one area right there by the Alumni Center that's already no parking. So what we've kind of got in that area is kind of a stair step where different things are no parking. This cleans it up and makes that whole section no parking. Yes.
Are they just parking there because they don't want to buy a parking permit? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes. It is. I will say that there's an ordinance coming next month that this section here, we do realize that this street is wide. This next ordinance that's coming is going to have a list of streets. We know that there's some homeowners on that street that have to park there. This street and a couple more will fall into that ordinance where it will be allowable for the homeowners to park there, but everybody else will not. And that will be done through a permitting process that the city's taken on that we'll introduce next month. But in this ordinance, we're asking you to pass this and designate as a no parking area. Any other questions?
Is there a motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. City Manager's report.
There was no public comment, so I have nothing to respond to at this point, so I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Jamie.
All right, good evening again. We're going to start with our sales tax. And I added a new little, I want to say widget. up to the top right corner. That kind of shows us, the green line is how far we've come so far this year in revenue. Our budget is $1 million, and last year, what we received in sales tax revenue. As of April of 2021, we have received $712,000 in sales tax revenue. We are still trending higher than our budgeted numbers, and a little bit more than halfway of to the revenue of last year. So I do feel like we are going to hit budget and hopefully finish a little bit higher. The next slide is same slide. This is our analysis from March numbers. I actually just received the confidential report for April, so I didn't have time to finish it. Otherwise, you would have had both. This just takes our top 10 categories of sales tax and kind of gives you a breakdown over the last 4 years of March numbers. This is not the whole year. This is just March as a segment. So as you can see, over the last 4 years, I mean, we have a steady increase, and of course, mainly retail trade is our driving factor here. So talking about retail trade, we have on the top left is your pie graph that tells you how your retail trade is broken down for March of 2021. On the top right, it gives you a retail trade for March for each year. So you can, or for each month for each year. So it kind of gives you a spread of just the retail trade so you can kind of see how the trends go. And then the last one is online sales. We are continuously seeing an increase in online sales tax revenue. And I mean, I don't see that that would decrease anytime soon. But again, that is, you know, thanks to the sales tax law that was passed a couple of years ago. Now Commerce is getting their portion of sales tax related to online purchases. So does anybody have any questions on sales tax? Lovely. We are also going to be releasing the application for hotel occupancy tax funds. It's the same application as it was for last year. We have decided to streamline some of the forms that are needed when they're ready to actually receive their funding. We have listened and heard that some of them are very complicated and hard to understand. So when it comes time for October 1st, 2021, they will have new forms, much more streamlined. But this form is the same as it has been. It goes over the allowable categories. Nothing has changed. So I just wanted to give you guys a heads up, let you know that I will be sending out these emails this week. And they are going to be available on the website for anybody outside of our normal 3 askers. And then any questions about hotel tax allocation? Great. The last one is property tax. So our property tax revenue as of March 2021, we have received $2.2 million so far this year, which is 93.4% of our tax levy. So we are almost at our budget numbers. We are very close. So hopefully by April, if not beginning of May, we should hit our budgeted amount of 97% of our tax levy. Any questions? Wonderful. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Jamie. We're going to let Ms. Molly talk over some of our calendar of events.
Mayor and council, we mentioned to you all last week that the city would be joining up with the DEA to participate in the National Prescription Drug Take Back Day. Last meeting, Chief Bassham wasn't here, so I took that one, but I'm going to turn it over to Chief Bassham this time. And put him on the spot.
It's going to be April 24th from 10 to 2. We'll have a couple officers out there. One of our flight sergeant will be there. And basically any prescription drugs or anything that you've got, so you cleaned out the house with a family member, and you found a bunch of leftover stuff, we'll
And I'll add, one of the reasons why programs like this are so necessary is it also allows us to educate the public on the proper way to dispose of these old prescriptions. I don't know that it's happened anywhere here locally, but there have been studies where they find antidepressants in fish, because most people take those old medicines and just flush it down the toilet, which means it ends up at the city's wastewater treatment plant, which does not have the capacity or the ability to remove those substances from the water. So after treatment, it gets returned to a river, which ends up in a lake, which ends up in a fish. And so the fish are really, really happy, but I don't know that that's what we want to have happen. So disposing of old prescriptions down the toilet is not recommended, and so this is a great way to dispose of those responsibly. And also, there are some prescriptions that probably have street value, and this is another way to responsibly dispose of those.
I will say that this is a targeted approach, so we do this twice a year, but we got a grant last year, so there's always a collection box in our lobby that's permanent. So anytime anybody comes up with any kind of medication or something they need to dispose of, they can bring it up any day. This is just a targeted approach where we try to get out.
As you all are aware, early voting is in progress. As of a few minutes ago, Miss Bonnie covered for me tonight, but today was an extended voting hours day till 7 p.m. So I have listed for you there the dates and times. We'll continue early voting through this week with another extended voting hour day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Thursday. The only polling place this year in Commerce is Commerce City Hall. And we will also be your polling place for the May 1st general election date. Also on May 1st, if you make your way to downtown to come vote, there will also be the annual Bodark 6th annual car show taking place downtown. That was on the consent agenda tonight, so the roads will be closed. It'll be a safe event. You can come downtown, look at some of the old cars. Becky reminded me tonight is the kickoff day for Farmers Market as well. So come down to Farmers Market, come down and look at the cars, come vote. That will all be taking place Saturday, May 1st. One other thing to mention is beginning Monday, May 3rd, the city will begin its annual mosquito spraying. I provided everybody with a calendar of those dates. We'll go ahead and place it on our website as well and share it to our social media. And that document's available for the public if they would like a copy of that for themselves as well.
All right, Mayor, Council, just want to talk through a couple of the ongoing capital construction projects that we have underway. One of those is the airport fuel farm. As y'all may recall, there is a aviation fuel system at the airport, and it has been non-operational for over a year, which means that you're not able to land at our airport and refuel with avgas. And so that means that it severely limits the usability of our airport, and it also impacts those customers that have hangars and use our airport on a regular basis. And so prior to me joining the team, we had started a project to design a new avgas fuel system at the airport. When I got here, we asked them to add the possibility of adding Jet A. Jet A fuel is different than avgas, and so there are certain aircraft that need avgas, and then there are other aircraft that need Jet A. And so by only offering avgas, it still limits the usability of our airport. And so all of the design work that was included in that contract has been completed, and the project's actually ready to bid. Typically when I do a construction project, when I do an engineering contract that will include design services, I usually include bid services, and I usually include construction services with the engineer. The contract that was released for this particular engineer was design services only, so when I asked them to help us start the bid process, they informed me that it wasn't in their contract. And so I asked them to give me a price proposal to add bid services and construction services, and we received that quote. It's It's an additional $17,000. And so, if you'll recall, the design contract was $27,000 and change to design both the avgas and the Jet A fuel systems. And so this would be an additional $17,000. Initially, Jamie and I both had a minor heart attack, but there's a reason why these types of services are recommended. I am not a pilot. I am not a professional that is well versed in aviation fuel systems, but I do know that aviation fuel is highly flammable. And so a mistake with aviation fuel is a very major mistake. And so typically when an engineer or a firm will design a system, they design it for a reason, and the engineers spec it out in a certain way for a reason. And so when you bid that project out, you're going to have a whole list of contractors that offer to build it for you. Governments typically have to go with the lowest qualified bidder. I think public opinion is that we have to go with the lowest bidder. We actually have to go with the lowest qualified bidder. And so Uncle Bob could say, hey, I've got an old metal tank out here on the farm, and he bids this aviation fuel system, and he's way cheaper than everybody else. Well, there's a reason Uncle Bob is way cheaper than everybody else, is that nothing in his bid is spec. Well, I am not an aviation fuel professional, and so when we get bids from Uncle Bob and Uncle Fred and everybody else, we need to evaluate those to make sure they're all qualified bids and all their components meet spec. Having the design engineer involved in that process makes it much less likely that you're going to have a mistake. Then once you've awarded construction and Uncle Bob comes in and starts building the fuel farm, you need to be able to inspect it to make sure that it is constructed and installed according to specifications, again, because aviation fuel is quite flammable. And so I'm personally not comfortable constructing this project without the engineers involved to help us inspect it. And so with the addition of the $17,000, it still is under the $50,000 threshold, so it doesn't have to come to council for approval. So I'm mainly letting you know that I've approved the additional $17,000 so that we can bid this project out and construct it safely. But Jamie and I did confirm that TxDOT Aviation has a RAMP program, which is Routine Airport Maintenance Program, and we can get half of the dollars back from TxDOT Aviation, and this is a qualified expense.
I'm sorry, half of the 17?
Half of the design, and so the total project,
Half
total
of the
design is now $45,000.
So half of that?
Half of that can come
Oh.
back to us through the RAMP program, and we've confirmed that with TxDOT Aviation. And so that made us feel a little bit less heartburn about this additional money. But I have even greater heartburn thinking about trying to inspect this installation myself and then having somebody's plane blow up, and then the city potentially is on the hook. And so we are moving forward, and so we're going to be bidding out that project soon. So as we move forward, we'll keep you updated on the airport fuel farm.
Howdy, one other thing that I noticed in there that it did not include soil samples in any type of remediation that we may have to have if there is fuel leakage in the soil.
That
Is
was
that something?
well, and part of that is that contract was for the design of the installation, and where we're building the new fuel farm is not in the location of the existing fuel tank, and so they did geotechnical samples just so they could build the foundation right, but they didn't sample for fuel because we're building in a whole nother location.
Okay.
We still need to remove the existing fuel tank, and there are environmental things that we have to follow to comply with removal of the existing tank. That will be a separate project and a separate cost.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
And that removal will have to be done immediately once those tanks, or will we be removing those existing tanks?
The existing tank, I don't say, it doesn't have to be removed immediately, but we hope to move quickly because we don't want to leave it there. Yeah. Good question. Other questions?
Is construction complete at the airport?
Taxiway, all of the construction is complete. We haven't closed the contract yet because you've got to allow that to cure, but all construction activities have been completed. If you drive out there, you'll see they created I guess you could say, a new entrance at the northern end of the airport, and we have a county-approved culvert there as well. But there was a portion of the fence that had to be removed as part of that project. We'll need to go back and replace that fence to keep the airport site secured. So there's some fencing that's got to be done, but that's not part of that contractor. We'll do that ourselves.
Good.
Next project on the list is the raw water intake at Lake Tawakoni in the Motor Control Center. We had a conversation a month or two back about this particular project. Staff and I met with the new engineers out at Lake Tawakoni a couple of weeks ago, and so I can announce they have actually started the design process now, which is very welcome. However, we still have the TDA, or Texas Department of Agriculture, the grant that we have with them, has a deadline of December 21st. I can tell you with great certainty there's no way they're going to finish this project by December 21st. And so we're reaching out to TDA to get an extension. Those extensions typically are pretty easy to get, but technically we have to extend the deadline for that grant. But that project is under design. And one of the things that we're looking at, I can't remember if we talked about this or not, in light of the February freeze, or snowvid, if you will, the presence of backup generators and emergency generators is a hot topic everywhere in Texas right now. Used to only be a topic in hurricane zones, but now it's a topic everywhere. Our raw water intake structure does not currently have a generator. So I asked the engineers to design a system that would allow us to connect a generator. I don't think we need a generator permanently on site all the time, but we need to, in emergency, bring in a trailer-mounted generator and hook it up. Well, most of our infrastructure right now is so old, it operates at a voltage that you can't get generators for. So I asked them, if they're going to be designing this system anyway, let's change the voltages so that we can get backup generators. And so that is in the scope of the project, and we'll keep you updated as well. Water treatment plant, filter rehab, the update here is that we had talked about the possibility of getting a backup generator before the freeze, but it wasn't in the scope of work. So as a result of the freeze, we were able to find a trailer-mounted generator. We brought it in, had it available, but we do want a permanent generator on site at the water treatment plant. And so the engineers have added that to the scope of work, and I did get engineers usually give you an opinion of probable cost when they're working on a project. And so the opinion of probable cost for the generator at the water treatment plant is approximately $200,000. So that will be added to the cost of our filter rehab. The good news is that the America Rescue Plan, the ARP funding that was recently released from the federal government, we're in line to get $2.11 million of ARP funds. And water and wastewater infrastructure is an eligible expense. And so some of what we're going to use that funding for is replacement and actually existence of emergency backup generators. So we will fund that $200,000 out of the ARP funding that will be coming soon. Finally, at the wastewater treatment plant, right before I joined, there was a project that y'all authorized to replace 3 of the pumps at the wastewater plant. Design is completely finished, and we're waiting on approval from the Texas Water Development Board to start bidding. I asked Mike Tibbetts, our engineer, when the Water Development Board was going to finish their environmental review and let us get started, and found out that the engineer that's reviewing our stuff at the Water Development Board is on paternity leave. And so he has handed it off to another engineer, and so we're waiting on that. As soon as we get release from the Water Development Board, we will bid that project out and be under construction. And so those are the major updates for projects that we have going on right now, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Thank you.
One thing can I mention really quick? We're gonna have a special city council meeting to canvass the results of the May 1st election. So Gene thought he was getting out easy, but he's still gotta come to one more meeting. So May 11th at 6 p.m., we'll canvass the results of the special election at a special city council meeting, and we hope that you can join us.
Yeah.
Mr. Anderson, is there a need for an executive session?
Yes, sir, we'd like to meet briefly.
Okay. Since there is a need, we will meet under the law of numbered 551.0711 and 551.0712. We'll discuss Amir Rahman versus the City of Commerce, cause number 89253, 354th District Court, and Amir Rahman versus the City of Commerce, cause number 85096, Hunt County. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
I move.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. You know,
You beat me to it.
it's 7:37.
Oh, you've learned good lessons, Gene, good lessons.
Is this on your case because you're doing too much? You are unbelievable. Little stiff. Get that ice on tonight. As soon as you feel icing and then.
I was glad to be able to be here, Gene. Of course I'm okay. Especially if you want to see my old car, I'll show you how big the hole is.
Good job. Yeah.
No, it's, I've got medicine that doctors issued to me that I'm gonna be bringing over on the 24th, 'cause, I mean, I haven't used any pain meds since I've been out of the hospital.
Wow. That's awesome. Hey, what's that for you? Make it pretty good. Don't let anybody know you have it.
My daughter even came out and said,
Yeah. Molly, can Miss Judy go?
No, I said they're gonna be coming back.
All right, I started voting at 7, so I'm gonna head out. You sure you're okay with turning it off? The good news is it's turning it off and back on. A lot less paramount than it was 2 hours ago. Oh. I'll see you in the morning. All right, I'll be here.
Don't lock me out, I'm going to the restroom before I leave.
They got a good.
Not to lock me out, I'm going to the restroom before I leave.
Okay, I locked my front door.
Oh, I started to say, have you locked all 4 doors? Okay, cause, that no building is locked.
Really? It's pushed in, right? It's pushed in, it's open, pushed out, it's closed. Hey, how are you?
Doing good.
It's good to see you back here.
Yeah, so I've really, really been enjoying it. Lots happening.
Well, you look great.
Thank you. Lots happened last year because I got married, last February before the pandemic started. So we got a normal wedding and got to let go of travel on our honeymoon and everything before stuff like that. It was the perfect timing, really. We got married and then in August, we got a house here in town, here in Commerce, first house. North of here, up in that neighborhood behind the Nazarene Church.
The Northwood Edition?
Yes, over in there, that's where the house is. It's on, Brookhaven, right around that curve, like from our front of the house, you can see through that empty lot where you see like the highway, the Texas P and all that stuff. So it's a nice little place and we got it at a pretty good price and a pretty good interest rate on it too, so.
Well, I know, Jordan Barrett. Miss Bonnie, did you have any issues or are you good?
Oh, I'm all good, there were 6 voters.
Oh, not bad for
So, and I put the small machine, Molly,
in the office.
it's on your office and I closed your door and locked it.
Okay, thank you.
And it all went very smoothly.
Thank you, Bonnie.
You're welcome. Anytime, and if you're feeling bad tomorrow, just call me.
I will, thank you.
Enjoy your evening.
You too, Judy.
I was talking about.
Oh, they're gonna be quick, they only have 2 items.
Yeah, did I tell you I finally bought a TV Saturday? And, got the message today that they moved my Spectrum, equipment.
Oh, exciting. Do they, you need to take a day off so they can come, install it?
No, it was self-installed.
You need any more colors? My dad's really good at that and I can help you.
Yeah, I told him, I said, I wish my grandson was closer, because that's what he does all the TV.
My dad's really good at that stuff, so if he needs your help, call me.
All right, bye. Bye.
Oh, she's on foundation, yeah, that's right.
She's talking, but she can't do nothing.
But talk to Rich on that. They got the
Well,
air conditioner